welcome everybody that has come this afternoon and has decided to spend a Sunday afternoon with us, so we won't be lonely, at least for the next hour. I want to start by thanking so many people that have worked behind the scenes on this, who's recording it, Shyla, particularly Deepka, Shubhani, Reed. There's a lot of people that have slaved away at this to make it possible. IBPW is a mentoring network organization, and I can remember when it was founded in 1994, and it's scary to think it was founded that long ago because it means there have been literally thousands of women who have been helped over time by that organization, which was founded to encourage and guide women to achieve their professional milestones with work-life balance in particular. IBPW is now hosting its 16th annual book discussion event, which is really exciting in affiliation with Silicon Valley Reads. I do think this is maybe the first year that there are so many books for the quote book of the year. But Silicon Valley Reads comes out of the Santa Clara County Office of Education, the library, and the San Jose Public Library Foundation, all of the people that are most interested in reading and in literacy for others. The events are all designed to promote reading, literacy, broaden the exposure to and appreciation of good literature, and build a sense of a strong community. And I have to give a little commercial because they have been outstanding over the years in the books that they have chosen, whether it's Together or other books from last year or some others this year. I looked at them first and thought, well, I don't know that I was going to read them. And then I would read them, and each one was absolutely wonderful in various ways. So what I'd like to do is to start by introducing all of our panelists, and then the way we're going to run it is we each have a question we're going to talk about for a few moments, and then we'll switch to another panelist, and we'll ask another question, and the panelists will speak to that question. And then at the end, there is a question and answer box that should be on your iPad or desktop or whatever you're using. And after we're done, I'll let people know, okay, we're going to be switching out and answering some of the questions from the audience. Okay, so let me start with introducing. Okay, to find my notes. Nirja Rahman, a longtime Bay Area resident, very conflicted about what her pioneer image is. Research is in imaging and digital media, what has been wrought vis-a-vis social media and the current crisis. So I think we all feel multiple ways about social media. Shailaja Venkat Superman, PhD, is an associate professor emerita from the San Jose State University College of Business. And what I most love about her, she is a keen advocate of student emotional welfare. Raji Pillai, PhD, is the founder and president of Medical Affairs Consulting, Inc., which provides consulting services to medical device companies. She volunteers with organizations that promote education and social emotional learning in children. And she's a writer at Take This Down, www.rajiwrites, R-A-J-I Writes, W-R-I-T-E-S.com. And I am Michelle Kremen Bolton, PhD, also a professor emerita at the San Jose State College of Business, although I took my retirement many years before Shai did. I'm also the co-founder of a 25-year-old executive coaching firm, Executive Edge of Silicon Valley. I have focused a great deal on coaching and mentoring women. However, you know, I like men as well. I want to say that, absolutely. But my specialty is women. And I published a couple of books on women's leadership. So with that, without any further ado, I think we're ready to start with our questions. And I'd like to ask this question of Raji. What are the evolutionary underpinnings of loneliness?
Thank you, Michelle. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. I took a quick look at the list of attendees so far, and I see we have attendees from all over the US, as well as from the UK, where it's midnight, and from Australia. So thank you all so much for joining us today. So what are the evolutionary underpinnings of loneliness? Vivek Murthy writes about the evolution of loneliness by asking, why do we feel lonely? He cites the research of the late Dr. John Cacioppo, who's a co-founder of the field of social neuroscience. He was a distinguished professor at the University of Chicago, where he founded the Center for Cognitive and Social Neuroscience. He was actually the first to identify loneliness as similar to hunger and thirst. a necessary warning signal. And he was called Dr. Loneliness because of his expertise on the subject. He and his team found that human connection is a biological and social imperative. Vivek Murthy quotes Mother Teresa as saying, "If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other." It's a very profound and powerful statement. Dr. Cassioppo's theory of loneliness is that we have survived as a species mainly because of our ability to connect in social groups. Murthy cites evidence from anthropologists at Oxford, led by Dr. Suzanne Schultz, who found that early monkeys and apes, some 50 million years ago, connected in groups, not in pairs. Primates who used to be nocturnal started to hunt during the day, and this made them more visible to predators. And they discovered quickly that the pack has more power to withstand danger. And as humans evolved, it became clear that if you got separated from your group, your chances of survival dramatically reduced. So sticking together provided security for mating, to multiply the tribe, share the responsibilities of parenting, and to protect the children. Also, more heads are better than one. And so people in groups were able to solve problems better. How to make a raft to cross that huge river, what to do with this fire we've discovered, things like that. So stories make people feel connected and promote a sense of well-being. And hunter-gatherers were rarely apart. They had plenty of time to swap stories. From the cave drawings of ancient days to the books that we read and the stories we tell today, storytelling helps us feel connected and give us a sense of belonging. So this is how we are wired. And so when we feel lonely, it's a signal to take care of the social connections that define us as a species. In the book, having established the need for connection, Vivek Murthy set out to understand how this wiring works. So pro-social behavior reduces stress. Physiologically, this takes place via hormones and neurotransmitters. So for example, endorphins, which are released when you exercise, are also released by physical touch and by synchronous movements such as dancing. In our brain, we have so-called non-social pathways, which you use, say, when you're doing your taxes, not terribly exciting, or social pathways, when you're meeting a friend or spending time with your child. When you're doing nothing, guess which pathway is active? The social one. And as Murthy puts it, our relationships with other people define us. So when our ancestors were outside the tribe, a safety mechanism, a hypervigilance kicked in. The body is hyper alert, anticipating danger. Now the stress of that takes a heavy toll on the body, including a heavy toll on sleep. And therefore, it used to be very motivating to rejoin the tribe, to not be apart from this safe environment. So this hypervigilance, this anxiety when being around strangers, is what has evolved to be the loneliness we experience today. It is useful in the short term, but harmful if it is long lasting, and it results in serious implications to our health. So I'll stop there now.
Thank you, Raji. That was great. Nircha is up next, and here's a question that she's going to answer. Dr. Murthy talks about the value of togetherness, especially physical proximity in combating loneliness. What lessons can we apply to our life in these COVID days of social distancing? Such a relevant question.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. And thank you to all those people who are attending. I really appreciate it. And many thanks to Deepka of IBPW for hosting these and making us a part of this conversation that is so important today. So one of the reasons why I mentioned being conflicted about digital imaging is that I've been in this field since before there was digital media and social, these kind of much maligned, I have to say, social media apps that we are all used to. And in the last couple of years with the elections and this and that, I think we've gotten so used to the Twitterati's and stuff like that, that I had started to feel quite defensive about the whole thing. And if I can say one thing about the COVID year is that social media can be made useful in this time of social distancing. And a few of the things I'm going to talk about, just to make sure that what I'm talking about really works, I applied it to my own life, and I'll talk about that later. So one of the ways of connecting when you cannot connect physically, and Dr. Murthy gives lots of examples, and the Men's Shed, basically it's about getting out there and doing something. It's not easy for us to ask for help when we need it. But when we go out and do something for somebody else, such as in a volunteering activity, or even when you go to the hairdresser, right? We all remember Steel Magnolias. Okay, even when we go do some activity, it just automatically builds a connection because you're meeting when you don't really need to. And I think that's the part that's important about social media that can help, is that it's very difficult to ask for help when you need it, but you already have a connection, then you can get out there. And in giving, we receive, and in receiving, we give. So that's something that we can apply to social media. So one of the things that I did in this, using his framework, I love frameworks, by the way. So anything for a framework, to me, it makes it actionable. So a book like a self-help book like Together, typically I read and I say, yeah, I know what I'm talking about, but I can't use it. Okay, this is where I think Dr. Murthy excels. His book is very actionable. I think I took his two things to heart. One is about the circle framework, and the other one was the bowl, the third bowl. But taking the circle framework, I thought was, I don't know, do I need to?
Might be helpful to just really quickly.
Just release. Okay, so he talks about these three circles, your inner, the innermost, which is your most the closest people, 5 to 15, and then the next one where maybe your work colleagues or another set of people, maybe up to 50, and then you could be having like what would be typically called a social media circle. So that could be hundreds or thousands, depending on what you want. So I took that framework, and then he has percentages on how much time you should spend with each of those. And I think that's a very important part of it, because we can't be spending all our time on the social media, 1,000 people that do nothing, and that's where craziness comes in, or spending all our time on one person and then find that, both of you are lonely, even though you're sitting and eating together, you're both kind of lonely because one person cannot fulfill every need. So I took that framework and applied it to my group of 5 to 15. And I do want to point out that Dr. Murthy very much says that one really close relationship is not a good relationship either. It's as burdensome as having none, in a way. So I took essentially my closest group, which is family and kids, grandkids, and all of that. And that adds up to about, within his ratio of 5 to 15. And then I tried to make sure I stay in touch with them. I'm not seeing them, but whether it's through FaceTime and this various kinds of social media. My daughter and I, we started writing a book together. So she would write and then I would write. So do some activity that is different, and you're not talking about COVID and loneliness and social media, and not just doing something to intellectualize your brain. And I found it really worked. Then I tried that.
I'm so sorry. We're going to have to just have you wrap up if that's okay, and we're going to move on.
Absolutely.
It's such an interesting topic.
Similarly, I applied it to the middle group and the large group. And I found that I've lost touch with the middle group, but the larger group actually is better because there are people in India and all that I would normally never see, but because I've gotten into this habit, I see them. I applied to my hiking groups, my writing groups, and all of that. So I think that the greatest thing about the book, I would say, is that in this day and age, digital media actually lets you have togetherness, which you can't get with physical proximity. Thank you.
Right. And I think helping people understand what those three circles of connection were is really important, because we can look in our own lives at that. So we're going to go back to Raji, and she's going to answer this interesting question, yet another factor to look at. Neurological research has been conducted on areas of the brain that are involved when people engage with one another, are in physical or emotional pain. What are these findings and their implications?
So Vivek Murthy describes his experience as a medical resident when he was in training. and the distinctions that they made in their practice and in their training between physical pain and emotional pain. And for me, this was one of the most interesting learnings. So he describes that as they saw patients, if a patient was experiencing physical pain, the medical care team would swing into action, identify the reason, monitor, and treat the pain. If they found someone was feeling emotional pain, they would react with kindness, compassion, etc., but not as urgently or comprehensively. It was treated as a lower priority. Interestingly, within the brain, the sensory fibers that register physical pain overlap with those that register emotional pain. So if you feel loss, grief, loneliness, the same region of the brain lights up as when you get a physical blow. To me, this was fascinating. Now, so Murthy cites a really interesting experiment, which I'll call the Tylenol experiment. They divided subjects into two groups. One group was given Tylenol for 3 weeks, and the other was given a placebo. The Tylenol group, first of all, reported fewer days of social pain. And then separately, as a second part to the experiment, they had these individuals play an online video game called Cyberball. And that has 2 avatars whom the subjects thought were humans. The researchers had these avatars play just with each other, ignoring the human subject deliberately. So, the human is being shunned here. And the human thinks that these are humans who he or she's playing with. So when the researchers assessed their brain activity, the group that took Tylenol had less activity in the part of the brain responsible for pain. So physical and emotional pain, the pain of being shunned, are processed in similar ways by the brain. And there are several implications for this. For one, it helps us understand addiction better. Some of you may have known people who have struggled with addiction, opioids, narcotics. Some of you may have read a beautiful book called The Tennis Partner by another physician and author here at Stanford nearby, Dr. Abraham Verghese. It's about the author's friend, a medical student from Australia, who was a very talented tennis player who struggled severely with addiction. So loneliness can be one of the biggest causes and effects of addiction and addiction relapse. When people feel extreme emotional pain, they reach for strong painkillers. Just as a loss of social connection can lead to opioid addiction, similarly, the presence of social connection and support is essential to recovery. Nearly all of those who recover, who break that cycle of addiction and relapse, have had a trusted friend or a trusted social network of support. So just as loneliness has the power to kill, social connection has the power to heal. And I'll stop there.
Raji, thank you so much. And also, you were so graceful picking that up, because at the very last second, I was thinking it might be helpful to look at some of the neurological underpinnings and then talk about gender. So I'm going to answer my own question, which is, how does gender affect loneliness? Because I think I told everyone that gender is a variable that to me is involved with everything. And of course, there are neurological differences, but a lot of what I'm going to very briefly talk about are probably more social differences. And I have to say, as a card-carrying feminist, it was a bit, I want to say the word both annoying and disappointing, that in this book, Dr. Murthy found that the studies he had looked at showed that men and women have about equal rates of loneliness. And that shocked me. Part of me, I mean, it's not that I want anyone to be lonely, but I kind of felt like if there were really a real difference, maybe that would make for more changes in how people make decisions in their lives. Now, what it turns out is that the rates are approximately equal, but how men and women express it is quite different. And that would also hold, I think, for young children. I started looking at, since the book was published, what are additional studies, and this was quite impressive to me. A recent study published in 2020 involved 400,000 participants. I don't even know how they got that together. 45 countries over 39 years. They also found a very small gender effect, a little bit more with adult males than adult women. one of the terms that Dr. Murthy uses is emotional suppression. That really means pushing down your emotions. A study by the BBC in Australia found that men are much more likely to die by suicide than women, 3 times as likely. This was mentioned in the book. And yet women are much more likely to be acknowledged as having depression, because again, it goes back to what Raji said about asking for help. And we know that there are social overtones about what is considered a proper male, whether a young man or an older man, and a proper woman. And we have a luxury that we can ask for more help, and it does not affect our sense of who we are. One of the, I think, really fascinating things that Dr. Murthy talked about was this movement called the men's sheds movements. And if I may just read a little bit about it, men's sheds, as in, little tiny houses. I think it began when there was, an obvious difference noticed between how men and women deal with being social. The men would take women to these events. They would sit in the car, read the paper, and then maybe not complain about being lonely, but clearly were not connected to anything. So they started thinking about, well, what would help men actually, especially that second and third social and community framework of connectedness, what would have to happen? So Maxine began to imagine a different space where men could socialize together without feeling labeled as sick or lonely. So she started envisioning that maybe what they could do is to build a little shed. And sure enough, they started to build a shed next to the larger clubhouse. And all of a sudden, these men who previously had been sitting in their car reading the newspaper were coming over just to see what Alf was doing. And then after a little while, they're picking up hammers and screwdrivers and they're doing things. And so what do we know? Any of you that have men in your life of any kind know that face-to-face is not always the best way to talk with someone. Of course, you have to get the remote control switch out of their hands. But once you do that, sometimes it's more helpful to have that deeper, intimate conversation if the man is active. This is what the research is saying. So another few moments, a study in Japan found that losing a partner was more strongly associated with loneliness in men than women. But the most interesting finding of all, I thought, was that childlessness was more associated with women than with men. And that's fascinating to me. And perhaps there is some sort of biological thing still happening, even though my kids are in their late 20s and 30s. When do I feel most lonely? When I don't hear from my children. As soon as I hear from one, first of all, there's, okay, nothing is wrong. Nobody's dead, gone to jail, on drugs, etc. But, all the crazy things that Jewish and Indian women often think could possibly be happening, or God forbid, they got a C on a test. Okay. So it turns out that we are still very connected to those closest to us. And one of the differences is how women relate to their most intimate friendships as opposed to men. No surprise to anyone. And finally, another interesting finding in Murthy's book is having friends at work was particularly important to women. And so when you find women who do not feel like they fit in with the other people at work, that is when they feel the most lonely. That is when their performance starts to fall. So I'll end by saying, what's the gender difference? Women talk face to face, while men talk shoulder to shoulder. All right. Shailaja, let's go on and have you answer this very important question. What are some initiatives mentioned in the book that help tackle loneliness, and which resources are currently available in our Bay Area community for various demographics?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to everybody for being here to listen to this very important topic being discussed. So in this book, Vivek Murthy mentions a few coping mechanisms that have emerged in some countries that are more like bandages to mask the actual problem. Now, they are both amusing and depressing. Now, examples are karaoke booths for just one, robotic companions, hired companions like in Japan, like hire parents and boyfriends and girlfriends and children and so on. Now, those things aside, the author touches upon potential solutions as well to address the underlying problem. For example, he talks about programs for creating deeper connections between doctors and patients. The Togetherness program identifies patients who are lonely, and they then receive phone calls and home visits from medical staff. Another simple but very meaningful example is what's called the 3 Wishes program. And this is for terminally ill patients. And this program does thoughtful things for the patients and their families. Now, this one resonated with me in particular because when I sat outside an ICU in an Indian hospital when my mother was terminally ill, another family that happened to be there did like little things to help me out. And I still remember the cup of tea that they bought for me, even without me asking for it. And little gestures like that go a very long way. In the Bay Area, we have groups that attempt to provide support to caregivers and patients. One example is the Alzheimer's Association. Now, I've connected with them for my father, and I've attended support groups for caregivers of patients with memory issues. It is tremendously helpful. And it's also a relief when you connect with others who are in the same boat. Now, links to the Alzheimer's Association and some of the other organizations that I'll be mentioning over here are on an IBPW webpage, and the link will be provided to you. For youth, Murthy mentions Boys and Girls Scouts clubs. He also talks about an organization called Big Brothers and Big Sisters. Now, Big Brothers and Big Sisters, it matches at-risk kids, and they are called littles, with adult volunteers who are called bigs in mentoring relationship. Now, here locally, we have a Big Brothers and Big Sisters of the Bay Area. Now, finding a mentor for a child is as simple as clicking on a link that says find a big and entering the kid's details. And also there is a link that says be a big. And in his book, Murthy talks extensively about how being part of a cause bigger than oneself can help ease loneliness. So being a big, for instance, it's actually a wonderful opportunity for adults who have the time and want to give back to the community. Now, I have to add, I don't have personal experience with this organization, but it just seems like such a wonderful concept. For young parents, he gives the example of the culture in a country in Ethiopia, where people took care of one another, cooked for one another, took care of one another's children, and so on. Now, the Bay Area is a mix of various cultures, and there are people with very different needs. So here we have specialized groups catering to needs of specific niche populations, such as parents helping parents that help parents of kids with special needs. Similarly, we have groups such as La Leche groups that help new moms, mothers clubs, dads clubs for fun activities for parents and children. And then for South Asian women, for instance, who are facing domestic abuse, there are organizations such as Narika and Maitri. For seniors, there are organizations such as Life Elder Care that provides lonely seniors with meals, transportation, and home visits by volunteers, and so on. Now, one example from the book that I found to be the most interesting is the one in the blue zone of Okinawa, Japan. The concept is called the Mowai, and it's a social support network of people who visit one another and talk and share honestly. Now, those of us who are from India are quite familiar with the kinds of relationships that we have with neighbors and friends and extended family, where people do not hesitate to ring one another's doorbells to just chat. Now,
I am just going to ask you to wrap it up, if you don't mind. I'm so sorry.
Sure,
I hate doing
sure,
this.
sure. No problem at all. So, and here we have the Nextdoor online group, for instance, to help stay connected with neighbors. And lastly, on a practical note, he talks about the importance of shared spaces in towns like plazas, village greens. Locally in the Bay Area, we have community gardens where people of all ages can hang out and bond, and senior centers like the Indian Community Center for Seniors.
Thank you so much. And I think that there is a link somewhere on, where is the link going to be that lists actually all these resources you've talked about?
I just posted it, Michelle.
Oh, okay.
It's in the chat, and it's on the IBPW website.
Great, thank you so much.
Sure.
So we're going to go on to our next question, and Nirja is going to help us with that. What is the role of building social emotional resilience in combating loneliness? Good question.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Actually, that's one of my, I would say, favorite topics in a way, because of having been an only woman and an only tech in a very early stage kind of a place, you kind of have to find strength from within yourself. And you mentioned yourself how women at the workplace like to be with one another and things like, and that's absolutely true. That's how we find strength. However, another really great way of finding strength and combating loneliness is through learning to be with yourself and thinking on your own. Okay, and actually, Vivek Murthy has a very nice couple of sentences about it. He says that small irritations can lead to exaggerated reactions. When you're actually in a, maybe not in such a centered place, you can actually have a reaction that puts people off, which causes more loneliness. So you're actually have a comfort with loneliness, or solitude, he calls it. And he calls it solitude, paradoxically, protects against loneliness. And what he means by that is do something by yourself that brings you peace of mind. I've met many people who've actually become pretty good at this, whether it's reading or whatever. I was at the Ayurveda center, and one of the doctors there said that his family was out in Kerala and this guy was in northern India. And he said that every night in the evenings, he practices 2 hours of mridangam. He was a very good mridangam player, which is a kind of drums. And he said that's meditation for him, because I had been complaining about how the meditation classes weren't doing anything for me. So I think the point is, for me, it's gardening. I like to garden on my own. In fact, I'm so protective about it. I don't have other people do it. So everybody has a certain amount of strength they can build from within themselves by learning to be alone and having a good time. And then some people will need more together time. And Murthy is very good about that, in saying that the amount of togetherness we all need is different. Some people need more, some people need less. But the point is, how do you have a quality interaction when you are together? And if you are actually having a quality interaction with yourself, you will actually have a quality interaction when you're together. So it's a very useful thing to identify what helps you when you are by yourself. And it can be different for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was really helpful. And the idea that sometimes people have, if you are alone, sometimes there is shame or stigma attached with that. I don't know if it's, it's different in different cultures, but when I was very young in high school, if I was alone on a Saturday night, meaning feeling sorry for myself in my room, that's when I felt lonely, until, of course, we do find strength and picked up a book. And that's where my great love of reading came from. Okay, next question for me. Is loneliness more prevalent among the senior population than early in one's life? And this is a question that's always been fascinating to people, to social welfare agencies in the time of COVID and other times. And I've got to start with a wonderful quote from the author Terry Pratchett. Inside every old person is a young person wondering what happened. So there's a lot of really interesting stereotypes about the loneliness of old people in cities like New York, where there's rent control, and there's a lot of older widows in particular who live there by themselves. But the reality is actually counterintuitive. And Dr. Murthy's findings are that actually loneliness is not necessarily more prevalent in seniors. It really depends upon the individual factors. Now, having said that, studies show that 40% of seniors do feel some regular degree of loneliness. But the real shocking statistic is actually that 60% of Americans feel lonely at times, feel left out, poorly understood, and lack companionship. So in some ways, seniors are doing better. And it depends upon a lot of individual factors in addition to social factors. Some of those are you living alone? Which may not be as important if you've lived alone through most of your adult life. But if for the first time you are learning to live alone, that can lead to a great deal of loneliness. Loss of family and friends. It may be that it's not just the loss of people generally, but the loss of specific people. If you have been married or with a partner for a very long time, decades, and then that partner leaves, you cannot specifically replace that partner. That's in that intimate first circle. And that does create a lot of loneliness. And sometimes it's confused with mourning and the grieving period. And of course, I don't know that there is really an antidote for that. Other factors, chronic illness, hearing loss. What's interesting in our society is we treat blind people in certain ways very well, not as objects of derision, but we tend to laugh for whatever reason at people that have problems hearing. And so what it tends to do is to make people withdraw, either to withdraw from conversations they could be in or to withdraw totally. And now, of course, with social media and Zoom, if you're hearing it's more of a problem, you may decide not to deal with it at all. I was asked in talking about seniors to really look at other phases of life. And some of the research I was able to find, some was in the book, was that loneliness kind of ebbs and flows. And so it turns out that Generation Z, which is our newest younger group, not infants and middle childhood, but sort of adolescents just getting into college, a lot of that may be COVID related because Gen Z hasn't been long enough without COVID. So it's interesting to me that in middle age, we are busier, we are more involved in our career, we are more likely to be working. If we are parents, we are more involved to be with children. Our parents are older, we are dealing with them and seeing them more often. So of course, it makes sense that there's sort of, the opposite of a V shape. One of the reasons that I asked, when Deepka asked me to be on this panel, and I said, I'd really like to talk about seniors, is in part because I hate to admit it, I'm a senior myself. And one of my fears, to Neerja's points, is that what will happen someday when I'll be alone? And I haven't lived alone since I was 21 years old. And it's funny because back then, I always thought I'd rather be alone than to be with other people and to not feel like I was a fit with them. That was indeed the worst type of loneliness at all. So I'm going to take your advice, Neerja, and I'm going to start working on this. But mostly I'm alone in my head all the time because I'm always reading a book. So
well, that's something we do. Yeah.
That's something that
it's good.
It's good. It's good. So Shai, if you'd like to take the last question, what are potential ideas and resources that would be great to have to abate loneliness? And if I can just add one thing, think about pets. There's a whole concept called mutual rescue, which is not only that you rescue the pet rescues you, and having a pet for some people is a potential resource. And I'm an insane pet owner, so I had to bring that up. Thank you.
Okay. Now, as far as solutions or potential ideas, resources that would be great to have. Now, first of all, we have so many categories of people who are susceptible to loneliness. So solutions would have to be tailored to each of these demographics. So for example, I'm a mother of teens. Now, I know that girls' friendships come with a lot of drama in middle and high school. They face peer pressure to grow up quickly. So schools could take it upon themselves to help girls understand their confusing feelings and make them feel comfortable to talk to adults about issues such as betrayals and friendship and so on. Now, this could be something that is purposefully incorporated into school curriculums. Now, in his book, the author, he mentions a program called Beyond Differences, and it encourages parents to talk to their children about friendship, compassion, including lonely kids into their groups during lunch or recess, getting to know kids from different backgrounds, and so on. And I think there is a very dire need for programs such as this. And the goal would be to teach both kids and parents how to be more inclusive. Now, from personal experience, I know that college students can be tremendously stressed and also be very lonely. And it could be a multitude of reasons, personal reasons, financial, family, health. And one incident in particular that sticks in my mind is when I was teaching at San Jose State and I was in my office, my door was partially open and a student asked if he could just sit in my office for some time. He did not want to talk. He just wanted to sit there. So he just sat there for some time, then took a deep breath, thanked me and left. And that had a very big impact on me. And I realized how important it is for people to find safe and non-judgmental people and places to de-stress. Now, schools have counseling centers, but a lot of times it's up to faculty and staff to notice that students need help and encourage them to call the counseling department. So more training around mental health would be great. In other areas, of course, seniors, we can always do better in that area. And one idea that I had, especially since I have a high schooler, is that a program that pairs seniors with high schoolers who check on them once a week and help them, say, with technology. So students could get their volunteer hours and seniors get the sorely required companionship. And also getting seniors to share their knowledge and skills with people who are interested in learning from them, because everybody needs a sense of purpose in life. So for many years, my father taught students to recite Sanskrit scriptures. His students came home, but now the silver lining of this pandemic is that there is wide acceptance of video conferencing. So if we can find a way to get seniors comfortable with it, maybe have high schoolers help them with that, their circles can expand dramatically. And then another area where we could certainly do better in this country is with neighbors. In India, everybody knew everybody where I grew up, but here it's not the same. A while ago, the folks in my local neighborhood here in Los Gatos, they started a pink flamingo program where a plastic pink flamingo on someone's front yard indicated an invitation for others to join in on an informal kind of event for neighbors to meet. But this kind of petered out over time. And so when the pandemic finally goes away, I think it would be very nice for those flamingos to come back again. And last of all, I think what we can do in our personal lives is pay more attention to our families and friends, have deeper conversations with our phones set to do not disturb. The goal should be to have real and meaningful conversations. So once we get something like this into our routines, it may help all of us feel more connected and less isolated.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much, Shai. So I think we now are actually ready to start talking about some of the questions that have come up. There are three of them that in a way are really two questions, but the first was, I don't know if any of us can answer this. Could schizophrenia result from loneliness?
I'm happy to take a stab. Oh, Nirja, go ahead, and then I can speak.
You go
well.
first. I was
Okay.
just going to say, I have one quote that I was looking, I saw the question, and he has one quote in the book which says you can relate it to anxiety and depression, those kind of disorders, but he doesn't mention schizophrenia specifically. So that's what I know. I went through my notes on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking exactly the same thing, Nirja. And the question is from Ruby. Thank you for the question. So he does make a connection between, how overlapping the three are: social anxiety, depression, and loneliness. And, loneliness is kind of multifactorial, as, what we've discussed. Schizophrenia is complicated and has many causes. I think it's not known exactly what causes it, but there's a combination of genetics, brain chemistry, naturally occurring brain chemicals whose levels may vary, as well as the environment. And so maybe, one way to answer that question, not being a psychiatrist and not knowing exactly the connection between the two, maybe I can speak to that by saying that in terms of, depression, for example, depression and loneliness can become kind of a vicious cycle. When one is depressed, one withdraws from society and becomes, more lonely. And similarly, when one is lonely, it can be depressing. So the three are definitely interconnected. There have been some studies that he cited regarding whole genome analysis to understand if there are inherited factors. What he found, what the researchers, I believe this was at UCLA, if I'm not mistaken, found that some percent, maybe about 20%, appears to be inherited, but behavior and one's environment are largely the contributing factors to loneliness. So
It's really helpful. The next question was really to flesh out more. I'm going to actually talk about the two questions as one. Someone that wanted us to flesh out more the three circles of friendships, and in particular, Neerja, maybe you have this in your notes, how much time to devote to the closest circle, or maybe you can give us the percentages for all, and what was Dr. Murthy's rationale for that?
Yeah, I do have it in my notes, since like I said, what I liked about his, thank you. I think it's from Rupal. Thank you for a question. It's very nice. What he says is that you should spend 50% of your time on your closest, the inner circle. The inner circle, he says specifically, is 5 to 15 people. So what I did is actually list my time. Actually, it was less than 15 and more than 5. I listed them out and saw how much time I was spending with them. And this is where I realized that if you only list one person, and as a nuclear family growing up in this country with no parents or anybody that I knew, I remember how stressful it was when I just had me and my husband and then our kids coming up together. So I suddenly connected with that. So make sure you list more than just your spouse, or maybe just your one child, so list at least 5 people, okay, and spend 50% of time. Then I found what I was doing with them. I was doing activities like having them over for dinner. We do book clubs. We can do, theater is a big thing I do. I go to theater with people. And I find that I started inviting them for theater over Zoom. And so these kinds of activities. So I was still spending time consciously with these people. The other 50%, he says, you can divide it up with your other 2 circles. The middle circle is the one he said that you probably people see routinely, but not necessarily. So work groups and people you might maybe go to art class with or something, those kinds of people. And then the least time is with the largest group. Now, in my case, the least time with the largest group actually ended up being more, because I started connecting with relatives in India, and less time with the middle circle. And of course, the middle circle did suffer for that reason. I think you have to make a choice about that second and third circles, I would say. But he does give a very good idea. One way I decided I would choose for myself is, am I a consumer of media, or am I a creator of media? So in digital media, we talk a lot about consumers of media and creators of media. So all these bad things, in a way, sometimes is if you're all just surfing the web and reading stuff. So that's just consuming media. If you're writing your blog, that's a creator of media. So see if your creativity is being utilized all the time in all these other circles. So if your creativity dies, then sort of loneliness sets in, your mind sort of goes. So that's how I would describe it. Was it 1 or 2 questions? But
those were really the 2 together. And if I may,
so,
I'd love to piggyback on that, because one factor that I don't think he talked about specifically in the book is I use a lot of workplace personality instruments in my work as an executive coach and in executive development. And so the Myers-Briggs is the most well-known. And one of the scales it measures is introversion, where people get energy from the life inside, as opposed to extroverts who pull energy from others. And so I think that if we were going to drill even deeper into these studies, we would find that for many introverts, even one BFF, especially younger people, is almost enough. It's helpful, of course, to have the relational and the community, the collective. Extroverts are not going to be happy only with the intimate, although they may tell you that they have 12 intimate relationships, which is possible. Everything is always possible, but an introvert is going to, by definition, not define 12 different relationships that they could all be so intimate. So that's where I think those individual factors really play.
Yeah, I did find that interesting, because I've had almost all these tests done, and I am what they call an introvert, but I did change and adopted extroverted behaviors. And one of the things they tell you is that right, learned it. I'm not so good at it. But anyway, one of the things they say is they're very tiring. So if you are one of these people, the most important thing in this is that the quality of your interaction is going to deteriorate or be not as powerful if you are tired. And so I think one of the things is to just learn yourself, which is why I like that thing about solitude and being, if you can be even 10 minutes of solitude, whether it's meditation or gardening, whatever, if you can get that energy back up, you can have more interactions. But there's no point having an interaction, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, if the quality of that interaction, you're not there, you checked out, you know? So, so I think that's a really good question. It's different for different people, I think.
That's right. So I'm going to move on to some other questions. So we have more coming up now, which is great. Right? So we're stimulating each other. This question starts by saying that the social circle is thought to be very close in India. So when someone is ostracized from the huge circle of neighbors, relatives, etc., isn't the loneliness experienced even more severe? So we're really talking about sort of societal effects here and how they impact individual loneliness. Shai, Raji, do you want to take a stab at that?
So this actually reminds me of the example that Vivek Murthy talks about in his book about the Hutterites, a Christian sect, where people live together in a colony and they take care of one another right from cradle to grave. And but the thing is that you have to conform. So if you don't conform to the central values of the group, then you are ostracized one way or the other. So unfortunately, yes, in close, very, very close social circles, that does happen. But I think we now have the advantage of living in a place where there are multiple social circles. So if one ostracizes us, we can move on to another one, find a different one that's whose values are more aligned to ours, maybe. I don't know. So anyone else with any thoughts on this?
Go ahead.
Sorry, did I interrupt?
Oh, no, I was waiting for you. Please go ahead.
So I think that I touched upon this when I said that when I came here, I was the only girl in a class of men and then only girl at work, et cetera, et cetera. I think that it doesn't matter if the circle you have to deal with is different and even tries to ostracize you. The thing to do is not to take it personally. I think the thing to do is treat it as their ignorance and treat it with love. Okay, if you return, I don't know what you're feeling, whether it's, you know, the question doesn't say whether it's you're feeling heat or rejection or what. It doesn't matter what that other person's feeling is that is excluding you. You don't have to reflect that feeling. You have to reflect your own feeling, which is positive, that you want to be part of the circle. And, you know, maybe it never failed for me. So it's hard for me to see what would happen if 2-3 times somebody does this. People did make fun of me. Or the worst that happens is you're ignored. You're there and nobody talks to you. Okay. As a woman, you know, you raise your hand 5 times and nobody hears. And so we have that joke going around. So I think that it's really important just to be positive, not to let their negativity be your negativity.
Great. And this kind of, if I may, in my head, this topic ties together with living arrangements. So maybe I'm thinking more about seniors and the fact that life expectancy for women is much longer than for men. And yet we seem to have these choices that you live alone, which you have control, you're familiar, it's got memories, or you live in institutions, or it's less likely in this country that you live with your children, although because of real estate costs, often that is becoming more and more seems to me an obvious answer. But Deepka and I have lunched together every so often, going back 20-something years. And we were talking once from the standpoint of real estate about the idea of how you have, and we were thinking mainly of women, how you buy a large house together. And maybe somehow it has 6 bedrooms and minimum 1, ideally 2 kitchens. And so you get to choose whether you're alone. You can ostracize yourself or not. You can piggyback on some of your other, you could call them roommates or whatever. But I think we have to think much more broadly about housing arrangements, and therefore not just for seniors, even for people at other parts of their life. And I'm going to jump ahead to a question that was more a comment that the college-going son of one individual said, there's a real difference between being alone and loneliness. And I think that is an important distinction. So a question someone's been waiting quite a while, and we're getting short on time, and we have a few more, but what are the characteristics of a quality or meaningful conversation slash interaction? Great question, and go for it. Who wants to take that one on?
I can start. And, I think this is a great question. I think all of us have experienced conversations or interactions where sometimes you're just left feeling kind of empty, that you've spent a certain amount of time and you haven't really, you just don't feel that great. And there are other times when you have a conversation, a shared experience, and you just feel rejuvenated. So what are the differences? And I also want to use this opportunity to just talk about service, which we haven't touched on, which is whenever one feels lonely, one thing that can really get you out of it is to help someone else. And I think that applies to the question of the social circles in India or anywhere, or feeling ostracized. If you do that, if you find someone who's kind of worse off than you and help them, you will both feel better. You're helping someone else and you feel like you have actually provided some support. And now regarding meaningful conversations and interactions, certainly, service is a meaningful interaction. Also when, one kind of connects with people and touches, how they really are, to be able to share what is on one's mind, be it about one's work or about an illness or about parenting, or for teenagers, I have a teenager too, about, school and friendships that are sometimes in turmoil. So I think there are many, meaningful, what are the characteristics of a meaningful conversation? I would say something that just, leaves you with more energy, more energized than when you started, where you feel you have made a connection with somebody. For me, that's what it is. So I'll stop and invite anyone else to speak.
Maybe I can just add a word to that. I think meaningful is if you take an interest in what the person is saying and they take an interest in what you're saying. So to have a meaningful conversation, do start off with hows and open-ended, not do you think X, to which answer is yes or no, but how do you think about this? And I think one very important point that Murthy makes is that we can be together and find meaningful interaction and avoid this loneliness problems with people we completely disagree with. And that is something you should say. It's not that I just have to get along with people who think the same as I do, especially these days. With all our diversity, the way to embrace diversity is to not necessarily change your mind, but to accept that it's that other person's opinion. And so, and in doing service, actually that happens often because you are dealing with people who are not like yourselves for whatever service you decide to take, and you are in that kind-hearted situation, you have that compassion within you. So I think that's a situation that enables all the vectors.
I think what I would like to add is a very simple example from my life is meaningful conversations with my children are usually those that happen in the car when I have them captive, when we're not necessarily talking about brushing teeth or eating lunch or doing homework, but we're actually talking about what is it that you're really worried about? Is there something that's bothering you? Anything along those lines, or it could even be politics, where we actually talk about something and we hear one another's opinions.
Yeah. So it's a complicated topic, and it's experienced both at the individual level, and as we talked about India and certain types of ostracization at the societal level. Our time is up, so I want to end with a quote from one of my favorites, Gertrude Stein. When they are alone, they want to be with others. When they're with others, they want to be alone. After all, human beings are like that. Thank you so much, all of you panelists and participants. And if we didn't get to all of the questions, I think we just about did. It is now, 1 minute to 5. Any final thoughts anybody feels compelled?
Well, perhaps I can sorry, go ahead, Nija. Okay, so
Nirja,
Nirja, go ahead.
Nirja.
I was just saying, don't be lonely. Don't just make it a habit. Every night to say, oh, was I sad today? Next morning, get up and do something about it. Even if it's just getting out in your garden, if you're that type, or if it's go on a walk. I go for a hike in the rain or call somebody. Pick up the phone and call.
Excellent.
Just do something.
Do something. Raji.
I agree. I think though, it's difficult when one is lonely and there's some depression to take that step. And so it's even more important to just try and reflect on, who are people I can reach out to? Who can I pick up that phone and call, or step outside, get some sunshine? Maybe that will help reach out and make that connection, because we all experience this at different points in our life.
That's right. And so don't judge yourself. This is not shameful. This is part of the human condition. And as women, we get to acknowledge our emotions. Some days that works better than others, right? Have a wonderful rest of your evening and a good week. And we are all hoping that COVID just continues to be a little bit more in the background rather than in the foreground. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Michelle.
panelists.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.